Welcome to History Teller YT, where forgotten voices and untold stories come alive. Today, we journey into the heart of Mindanao to meet a people who stood apart from both the Spanish Cross and the Muslim Crescent, the Subanen. History often tells us of conquest, conversion, and empire, but this story is different. It is not about kingdoms rising or falling. It is about survival, silence, and faith that refused to fade. From the rivers that shaped their lives to the sacred chants of the balian, from the thunder of the Buklog platform to their quiet resistance against colonial rule, the Subanen remind us that strength is not always found in war. It is often found in endurance. They resisted not with swords, but with rituals. They refused not with rebellion, but with memory. Stay with us as we uncover the remarkable story of how the Subanen preserved their ancient faith, Megayep, through centuries of pressure. A story of rivers, forests, chants, and dances. A story that proves sometimes the smallest voices last longer than empires. This is not just history. It is survival, identity, and the legacy of an unbroken faith. The Subanen, whose very name means people of the river, are among the oldest inhabitants of the Zamboanga Peninsula. Their existence predates colonial intrusions and external faiths that sought to redefine the archipelago's spiritual identity. For them, rivers were not just waterways. They were the lifelines that nourished fields, sustained fish, and gave rhythm to community life. Settlements often rose along winding streams, where children played, farmers washed their harvest, and elders performed quiet rituals of blessing. Unlike coastal peoples who were inevitably swept into trade networks and foreign alliances, the Subanen found their protection inland. Hidden among valleys and shielded by forests, their dispersed lifestyle made them difficult to conquer and nearly impossible to control. To understand them is to see that their resilience began not with armies or weapons, but with the very landscape that shaped them. Upland clearings became sanctuaries where families grew root crops and grains. Independence was baked into their way of life. No central authority could bind them, and no outside power could easily command them. It is this independence, quiet yet firm, that allowed them to resist both the Spanish Cross and the Islamic Crescent, even as the world around them changed. Unlike other groups that rallied under kings, datus, or sultans, the Subanen organized themselves under the Timue. The Timue was not a monarch, but rather a leader by wisdom, tradition, and example. His role was to guide, mediate disputes, and ensure harmony within the community. Decisions were made communally, reflecting their deeply ingrained sense of balance and fairness. This decentralized leadership became their shield against foreign intrusion. Without a central figure to capture or convert, colonizers found no easy entry point. Attempts at conquest often depended on co-opting local rulers, but among the Subanen, rulers were guardians, not absolute sovereigns. Each family maintained autonomy. Each settlement carried its own rhythm. This made large-scale conquest unfeasible. It was not rebellion in the sense of uprisings or war, but rebellion embedded in everyday life, a refusal to yield governance to strangers. In their governance, we see the earliest signs of how resistance became a cultural instinct, deeply entwined with the rivers and forests they called home. The Subanen survived not by isolating themselves completely, but by adapting without surrendering. They traded when necessary, shared with neighbors when practical, and maintained respectful distance when pressured. Foreigners may have seen them as timid or indifferent to change, but this apparent passivity was their greatest weapon. By living in dispersed hamlets, by retreating deeper into the mountains when threatened, and by holding fast to their rituals, They created a world that empire could not penetrate. Their villages were not marked by stone fortresses, but by resilience woven into daily practice. This way of life would prove crucial during centuries of encounter with powerful outsiders. The Subanen show us that sometimes survival is not about confrontation, but about persistence, quietly refusing to vanish. At the heart of Subanen identity lies Megayep, their ancestral faith. Unlike imported religions that centered around rigid doctrine or written scripture, Megayep was lived and breathed through every season of life. At its summit stands Magbabaya, the supreme creator, giver of life, and sustainer of the world. Yet Magbabaya does not rule alone. Around him dwell countless spirits, guardians of rivers, forests, mountains, and the souls of the departed. These spirits must be respected, honored, and remembered. Illness, misfortune, and calamity were often seen as signs of imbalance with these unseen forces, while prosperity and good harvest reflected harmony. For the Subanen, religion was not separate from daily life. It was the very language of existence. Planting rice, catching fish, or welcoming a newborn all carried sacred dimensions. Unlike colonizers who dismissed such practices as superstition, the Subanen recognized them as the fabric of reality, woven tightly between human and spirit. Central to this faith is the balian, priest healers who embodied both spiritual authority and practical knowledge. A balian was not only a ritual leader, but also a doctor, counselor, and keeper of oral tradition. They healed the sick with herbs, chants, and rituals, invoking Magbabaya's blessings and the protection of ancestral spirits. In times of crisis, when disease swept through or crops failed, it was the balian who stood at the center, chanting prayers that rose into the night. Unlike imported clergy who claimed authority from distant institutions, the balian's legitimacy came from lived experience and proven wisdom. Their knowledge was not written in books, but carried in chants, dances, and remembered stories passed across generations. In them, we glimpse the Subanen's deep refusal to surrender their spiritual mediators for foreign priests or imams. Through the balian, the old ways endured, even when threatened by conversion. Megayep was never confined to temples or specific days of worship. It was life itself. When the Subanen planted seeds, they prayed. When they harvested, they offered thanks. When someone fell ill, they sought healing not just through herbs, but through balance with the spirit world. Every stage of life was accompanied by ritual. This profound integration meant that to abandon Megayep was not simply to adopt another belief. It was to uproot an entire worldview, a framework through which they understood their existence. Thus, when missionaries and traders arrived with promises of salvation or threats of damnation, the Subanen listened politely but remained unmoved. Why abandon a living faith for foreign creeds when their creator, Magbabaya, was already watching over them? Here lies the quiet genius of their resistance, not in dramatic battles, but in the everyday refusal to surrender their worldview. Among the many expressions of Megayep, none is more central than the Buklog, the great Thanksgiving ritual. At its core is a remarkable wooden platform, carefully constructed to echo like a drum when danced upon. Its architecture is not mere utility, but sacred design, built with precision and respect for tradition. When participants stamp and sway upon it, the ground itself seems to join in the rhythm, resonating like the heartbeat of the earth. To stand upon this platform is to enter sacred space, where the human world and spirit world touch. The Buklog is both altar and stage, both prayer and performance, symbolizing the Subanen's unity and their dialogue with Magba. As the Buklog begins, drums beat in deep, resounding tones. Gongs clash, voices chant, and dancers move with rhythm that seems as old as the mountains. Each step, each gesture carries meaning, a language of the body offered to Magbabaya and the spirits. The festival is not merely spectacle, but prayer in motion. Food is shared, drink flows, and stories are retold, binding the community together in sacred joy. Unlike written prayers of foreign faiths, the Buklog speaks through sound, movement, and collective memory. To join in is to feel one's ancestors dancing alongside, to sense that the earth itself is echoing with gratitude. It is celebration and supplication bound into one. More than ritual, the Buklog is declaration. We are Subanen, and this is how we give thanks. To outsiders, it may have seemed like mere festivity, but for the Subanen, it was the highest form of devotion. Each Buklog carried the memory of generations and the assurance that their faith remained unbroken. Today, even after centuries of colonization, UNESCO recognizes Buklog as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. What was once dismissed as pagan is now honored as priceless cultural treasure. Yet for the Subanen, its true value has never been in recognition, but in continuity. Through Buklog, they told the world, we are still here and our faith still dances. When a Spaniard arrived in the Philippines in the 16th century, they brought with them not only muskets and cannons, but also the heavy weight of the cross. Their mission was not purely economic or political, it was deeply religious. Guided by the doctrine of conquest, they believed that true dominion over a land was achieved not only through force, but through conversion. Thus, friars and missionaries marched side by side with conquistadors, planting churches in conquered towns and ringing bells that announced both salvation and empire. Across Luzon and the Visayas, this formula worked with stunning speed. Villagers were baptized, towns were built, and the Catholic calendar soon shaped daily life. But in Mindanao, especially in the Zamboanga Peninsula, the story was different. Here, the Subanen lived in dispersed settlements, spread along rivers and valleys far from the centers of Spanish control. They were elusive, invisible to census lists, and difficult to corral into the centralized reductions. The clustered villages designed for easier administration and religious indoctrination. To the Spanish, this dispersal was a weakness. To the Subanen, it was their shield, the very reason they could resist both empire and faith without raising a sword. Spanish missionaries did attempt to reach the Subanen. They preached in small chapels, introduced the rituals of baptism and confession, and tried to lure communities with promises of protection. At times, they found small groups willing to attend Mass, but attendance did not equate to conversion. The Subanen listened respectfully, even curiously, but when the friar departed, they returned to their balian, their chants, and their Buklog. This puzzled the Spaniards, who equated conversion with obedience and equated refusal with rebellion. Yet the Subanen were not openly rebellious. They rarely raised arms or shed blood against missionaries. Instead, their resistance was a softer, subtler form. They nodded politely, accepted gifts, but did not surrender their hearts. The friars called it indifference, but in truth, it was resilience. Their answer was clear though unspoken. We already have Magbabaya. Why would we need another god? For Catholicism, the Subanen way of life seemed incomplete, waiting for salvation. But for the Subanen, their faith was already whole. Megayep had given them moral order, healing practices, rituals of gratitude, and a vision of a universe deeply connected to the land they lived on. The Catholic insistence that they abandon all this seemed less like salvation and more like cultural erasure. Thus, Their refusal to convert was not ignorance, it was wisdom. They saw no reason to replace a living, breathing faith with something foreign. They were not hostile, only firm in their conviction. In this we glimpsed the genius of their resistance. It was not rebellion, but endurance. It was not fiery revolution, but steady refusal. And this refusal would carry them through centuries of attempts at conversion. Before the Spanish, another great faith had already reached Mindanao, Islam, through trade with Bornean, Arab, and Malay merchants. Islam entered the southern Philippines in the 13th and 14th centuries, long before Magellan's fleet ever landed. The sultanates of Sulu and Maguindanao flourished, creating networks of power, diplomacy, and culture that rivaled any European presence. Many coastal peoples accepted Islam, drawn by its strong moral code, unifying laws, and the prestige of belonging to a wider world stretching from Mecca to Malacca. The crescent moon shone brightly across southern seas, guiding ships and shaping kingdoms. Yet inland, in the rivers and valleys of the Zamboanga Peninsula, the Subanen lived much as they always had. The Sultanate's influence reached them only faintly. Islam offered power and belonging, but the Subanen were already secure in their identity, anchored by Megayep and their ancestral ways. Still, the story was not one of absolute separation. Some Subanen did intermarry with Muslims, creating mixed communities later known as the Calabogan. In these communities, elements of Islamic practice blended with Subanen traditions. A family might recite Islamic prayers while still honoring ancestral spirits. A man might wear Muslim clothing while still participating in the Buklog. This blending was not surrender, but adaptation, Subanen specialty. They borrowed when useful, but never abandoned their roots. Even as the sultanates sought to extend their reach, they found the Subanen unwilling to fully submit. Unlike coastal peoples who relied on trade with Muslim rulers, the Subanen's independence came from their rivers and forests. They had little need to bend. For them, Islam was a neighbor's faith, not their own destiny. Thus, by the 16th and 17th centuries, when both Catholicism and Islam vied for dominance in Mindanao, the Subanen remained firmly themselves. To outsiders, this might have looked like indecision or stubbornness. But in truth, it was a conscious choice. They already had a supreme being, Magbabaya. They already had a moral framework, sacred rituals, and healers who guided them through illness and disaster. Conversion to either faith would mean abandoning not only belief, but identity. And so, while others bowed to the cross or the crescent, the Subanen bowed only to their God and their ancestors. Their choice was not to choose, and in that choice lay their survival. If the Subanen had marched in a battle against Spaniards or Muslims, their story might have ended quickly in blood and conquest. But their resistance was quieter, more enduring. Their greatest weapon was retreat. Whenever threatened, they simply withdrew deeper into forests and valleys, places outsiders found difficult to reach. Unlike centralized kingdoms that could be conquered by capturing one capital, the Subanen had no single seat of power to fall. They lived scattered, like water flowing through countless streams. To conquer them was to attempt to grasp water in one's hand. Impossible. This dispersal strategy was not accidental. It was survival perfected across generations. It made them frustrating to missionaries and impervious to armies. In retreat, they found strength. Another tool of Subanen resistance was politeness. They did not openly insult missionaries or reject Muslim traders. They welcomed them with hospitality, listened respectfully, and sometimes even participated in rituals. But when left alone, they always returned to their own ways. This created the illusion of compliance. even as their hearts remained loyal to Megayep. Such polite refusal was often underestimated by outsiders. Spaniards, who expected fiery rebellion, found only quiet persistence. Muslims, who sought allegiance, found only courteous distance. Yet this politeness was not weakness, it was shield and strategy. By refusing to antagonize, the Subanen avoided destruction. By refusing to yield, they preserved their soul. Ultimately, every Buklog, every chant of the balian, every offering to the spirits was an act of defiance. The Subanen did not need swords to resist empire. They needed memory, ritual, and the courage to remain themselves. Over centuries, while neighboring peoples were reshaped by Catholic or Muslim rule, the Subanen faith endured. Their resistance was not dramatic but steady, not loud but lasting. It was the resistance of being unbroken. And in this, they left a legacy far more powerful than conquest, the legacy of survival without surrender. As centuries passed, waves of change swept across the Philippines. The Spanish Empire fell, American colonizers arrived, and eventually an independent republic emerged. Yet through all these upheavals, the Subanen faith, Megayep, remained alive. True, many Subanen gradually adopted Christianity, often for pragmatic reasons. Schools, jobs, and government services were linked to baptismal certificates and church attendance. Some also embraced Islam through marriage or alliances with neighboring Muslim groups. But beneath these visible layers, the older current of belief never dried up. Ancestral spirits were still invoked during illness. Offerings were still placed by rivers, and the name of Magbabaya continued to be spoken in prayers whispered at night. Even among families who identified as Catholic or Muslim, traces of Megayep survived in small rituals, gestures, and sayings passed quietly from elders to children. Faith, after all, is not only about official labels, but about lived memory. And in the memory of the Subanen, their creator and their rituals never vanished. They lived in the shadows, waiting for moments of revival. That endurance is a remarkable testimony to how spiritual identity can survive centuries of pressure without losing its pulse. In recent years, global recognition has begun to highlight what the Subanen themselves always knew. Their rituals are treasures of humanity. The Buklog festival, once dismissed by colonizers as mere pagan superstition, has been recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. This designation is not simply a cultural award. It is an acknowledgement that the Subanen worldview holds wisdom and value beyond their own communities. It affirms that through rhythm, dance, and music, they preserved something profound, a way of connecting human beings to nature, ancestors, and the divine. The platform that echoes like a drum is now celebrated not as primitive, but as ingenious, a technology of faith and art intertwined. Yet perhaps the deepest recognition is not UNESCO's, but the quiet pride of Subanen elders who can now tell their children. The world honors what we have always cherished. Through this recognition, the Subanen faith, once threatened with erasure, gains new protection and visibility. It is no longer a fading tradition, but a living heritage, validated on the global stage. For the Subanen, faith is not just a matter of belief, it is identity. To speak of Megayep, of Buklog, of the Balian, is to speak of who they are as a people. While outsiders may categorize them as Catholic converts or Muslim neighbors, within their hearts the sense of ancestral belonging runs deeper. This is why their resistance mattered so much. If they had surrendered completely to foreign creeds, they would have lost not only a religion but a name, a memory, a peoplehood. Their story shows that identity is strongest not when shouted in defiance, but when carried quietly across centuries. Every chant, every harvest prayer, every festival dance is a thread binding them to their ancestors. And so, even in a world transformed by globalization and modernity, the Subanen continue to walk the rivers and hills with faith in their Creator and pride in their name. This is the legacy of resistance, not war trophies or monuments, but living identity carried in the heart. After Spain's fall, the Americans arrived in 1898, bringing with them promises of modernity, democracy, and education. For the Subanen, this new colonizer brought different pressures. Instead of friars, they now faced school teachers and bureaucrats. The American system emphasized literacy, governance, and integration into a nation-state. Conversion to Christianity was still encouraged, often through schools run by missionaries. But even here, the Subanen found ways to adapt without surrender. They sent children to school, yet continued teaching them the old chants. They learned English words, but still prayed in their own tongue. They attended church services, but celebrated Buklog in secret. American colonialism was less about conquest through faith and more about conquest through culture and economy. Yet the Subanen responded with the same strategy: adapt, borrow, but never fully abandon. Their survival instinct was not to fight openly, but to weave the new into the old, ensuring that Megayep still lived within their lives. When the Philippines gained independence in 1946, the Subanen faced yet another wave of transformation. The government sought to integrate indigenous peoples into the national framework. Roads were built, settlers from other islands were encouraged to migrate into Mindanao, and missionary work intensified. Catholic and Protestant groups competed to win converts, building schools, clinics, and chapels in Subanen areas. Many families converted publicly, attracted by the benefits of education and health care. Yet privately, the balian continued to guide rituals. Subanen households often lived in dual worlds, one shaped by government forms and church attendance, another shaped by ancestral rites and spiritual chants. Outsiders often misunderstood this duality, calling them half-hearted Christians or syncretic pagans. But in reality, it was a continuation of their old strategy: endure through adaptation. Conversion on paper was survival in the modern state, but the heartbeat of Megayep remained unbroken in the background. One of the greatest challenges in the 20th century was not conversion, but land. As settlers poured into Mindanao, vast tracts of Subanen ancestral lands were taken for farms, logging, and mines. Rivers were diverted, forests stripped, and hillsides reshaped. For a people whose identity was tied to land and rivers, this was a profound assault. Yet even as territory shrank, rituals endured. The Buklog could be performed even in smaller clearings. Chants could be spoken even beside new roads. Offerings could be made even in landscapes scarred by development. This persistence is striking. Though deprived of much of their land, they refuse to be deprived of their faith. Their endurance teaches that while land can be seized, the memory of land, the songs, the prayers, the stories tied to it, remains untouchable. And so the Subanen faith, though pressed hard by colonization and development, continued to survive as an unbroken thread in the modern Subanen world. The role of the balian remains central, though often hidden. Balian are not only healers of physical ailments, but also guardians of memory. They carry the chants, the rituals, and the oral traditions that tie the present to the past. When a child falls sick, families may bring them first to a clinic, but later to a balian, ensuring both medical and spiritual healing. When a harvest begins, it is the balian who leads prayers of gratitude. When death occurs, the balian guides the spirit of the departed across the threshold to the other world. In a society where formal religion is dominant, the balian often operates in the background, but their presence is felt in every significant life event. They're the quiet backbone of Subanen spirituality, ensuring that Megayep remains a living faith, not merely a memory. Today, many Subanen communities live with both biomedical clinics and balian practices. This balance is not contradiction, but complementarity. Subanen families recognize that antibiotics can cure infections, but they also believe that spiritual imbalance can cause illness no medicine can heal. Thus, they turn to the balian for rituals that restore harmony with spirits, protect against malevolent forces, or bless a new house. This dual practice shows the resilience of their worldview. Outsiders often see this as superstition clashing with science, but for the Subanen, it is integration, using every available tool to protect life. The balian is not in competition with doctors. They serve different realms. And as long as the balian continues to perform chants and guide rituals, the ancestral faith remains alive, adapting seamlessly to modern times. Beyond healing, the balian serves as the custodian of identity. In their chants are encoded genealogies, myths, and histories that cannot be found in books. In their rituals are the instructions for building the Buklog, for making offerings, for communicating with spirits. If the balian disappears, much of Subanen culture risks fading. This is why the community reveres them, not as rulers, but as vessels of continuity. In them, the unbroken resistance of the Subanen takes flesh. Through them, children hear the old stories, witness the old prayers, and learn that their ancestors are not gone but present. In a world where conversion and globalization threaten to erase indigenous faiths, the balian remains the unyielding bridge, a reminder that the Subanen are still themselves. Even in the 21st century, the Buklog continues to stand as the central heartbeat of Subanen spirituality. Despite centuries of colonization, despite the encroachment of Catholicism, Islam, and modern secularism, the ritual platform still rises in villages when the time of Thanksgiving comes. The construction itself is a sacred act. Elders supervise, younger men cut and carry the wood, women weave mats and prepare offerings, and children observe, learning the steps that will one day be theirs to continue. When the final posts are hammered and the platform begins to echo under the dancers' feet, it is as if generations of ancestors rise to dance alongside the living. Every Buklog is a declaration. We are Subanen, and our faith is not gone. Outsiders may view it as cultural performance, but for the Subanen it is far more, an unbroken line of gratitude to Magbabaya. In each stomp of the platform, in each gong strike, one can hear the rhythm of centuries refusing to fade. The Buklog is not simply about prayer. It is about community renewal. It is the moment when scattered families return to the village, when distant kin reunite, and when disputes are set aside in favor of harmony. As food is shared and songs are sung, the sense of belonging deepens. Children see their heritage in action. Elders feel pride that traditions still live, and adults find strength in unity. The ritual also acts as a social equalizer. On the Buklog platform, rich and poor, young and old, male and female, all dance together. The sound reverberating from the wooden planks is not just the rhythm of prayer, but the rhythm of communal solidarity. This unity is itself an act of resistance in a world that often divides and marginalizes indigenous peoples. Through Buklog, the Subanen continually renew themselves, not just spiritually, but socially, ensuring that their identity remains whole. Yet the Buklog, though resilient, faces challenges in the modern world. Logging, mining, and land conversion threaten the forest from which wood for the platforms is drawn. Migration scatters Subanen families into urban centers where ritual knowledge is harder to pass on. Younger generations, lured by television, smartphones, and city jobs, sometimes see the Buklog as outdated. Still, elders insist on its continuation, adapting where necessary. Some communities record chants. Others invite scholars to document rituals, while others integrate the Buklog into cultural festivals to spark youth interest. The Subanen understand that survival requires flexibility, but never abandonment. The Buklog is not simply a festival, it is their soul. And so, even in the face of modern challenges, it continues to be danced, prayed, and remembered. As long as feet stamp on wooden platforms, the Subanen spirit endures. In the modern Philippine state, the Subanen, like many indigenous groups, face the challenge of recognition. For decades, laws often ignored their ancestral land rights, treating forests and rivers as government property. Logging concessions were handed to corporations, mines dug into sacred hills, and settlements displaced in the name of development. But with the rise of indigenous rights movements in the late 20th century, things began to shift. The Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, IPRA, of 1997 recognized the rights of tribes like the Subanen to claim ancestral domains. For the Subanen, this was both a victory and a new struggle. On paper, they now had the right to their land and traditions. In practice, enforcing these rights was difficult. Bureaucracy, corruption, and powerful business interests often stood in the way. Yet the law gave the Subanen a new tool of resistance. Not the retreat of old, but legal assertion. They could now speak not only in the language of spirits, but also in the language of courts and government. Despite recognition, the Subanen remain marginalized. Many villages lack basic infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Stereotypes paint them as backward or primitive, and their rituals are sometimes ridiculed by outsiders. Yet this marginalization has only deepened their determination to preserve what matters most. If outsiders will not honor them, they will honor themselves through ritual, through faith, and through community. Every Buklog, every balian chant is not only prayer but protest, a reminder that they're still here, still Subanen. In the face of government neglect, they turn inward to their traditions for strength. It is in these quiet, enduring acts that their resistance continues. They may not march in political rallies or occupy city streets, but their very persistence and identity is a defiance stronger than banners or slogans. They remain what they have always been. People who refuse to vanish as citizens of the Philippines. The Subanen also face the challenge of balancing national identity with tribal identity. They are taught the national anthem in schools, carry national ID cards, and participate in elections. Yet they also know that their deeper allegiance lies with the rivers and forests, with Magbabaya, with their ancestors. This negotiation is not easy, but it reflects the dual worlds they inhabit. To survive in the modern nation, they adapt, working in cities, attending universities, even entering politics. But wherever they go, they carry pieces of their heritage. Some wear beads woven in traditional patterns. Others invoke ancestral names, and many return home during festivals to join the Buklog. In this negotiation, we see once again their genius. Not rejection of the outside, but refusal to abandon the inside. They remain Subanen, even as they walk in a nation that often forgets them. For the Subanen, history has never been written in books, but spoken in stories. Elders recount myths of creation, tales of ancestral heroes, and warnings of spirits to children gathered around fires. These oral traditions are not mere entertainment. They are archives of identity. They tell the community who they are, where they came from, and how they should live. In societies where written records dominate, oral tradition is often dismissed as unreliable. But for the Subanen, it is the lifeblood of memory. Through storytelling, they preserve their worldview when colonizers tried to erase it. Through chants and myths, they carried their faith through centuries when written texts were controlled by outsiders. Storytelling became their invisible fortress, one that no conqueror could breach. To silence Subanen identity, one would need to silence their voices, and that never happened. Within Subanen villages, elders hold special respect not only for their wisdom, but for their role as memory keepers. They know the chants of the Buklog, the myths of Magbabaya, and the genealogies stretching back through generations. When they speak, the community listens, for in their words lies both past and future. Their stories are not fixed, but living, retold with variations that keep them relevant to changing times. A myth told during a drought may emphasize balance with nature, while the same myth told after migration may emphasize resilience in exile. Elders are thus not only preservers, but interpreters, ensuring that tradition is never static but always alive. Without them, memory would fade. With them, memory becomes resistance, a way of carrying identity through time despite all pressures. Today, storytelling faces new challenges. Younger generations spend more time on phones than around fires, more hours watching television than listening to grandparents. Yet, some Subanen communities have found creative ways to adapt. They record chants on mobile phones, write myths into school materials, and stage dramatizations of stories during festivals. By doing so, they bring oral tradition into the digital age. This is not dilution, but continuation. Storytelling has always been flexible, adjusting to new contexts. What matters is not the medium, but the message. That the Subanen are people of the rivers, people of Megayep, people of unbroken faith. As long as stories are told, whether through chants, recordings, or dramatizations, the Subanen identity will continue to flow like the rivers that first gave them their name. The 21st century has brought with it the force of globalization, a tidal wave of influences that reach even the most remote valleys of the Zamboanga Peninsula. Subanen youth now grow up not only with ancestral chants, but also with smartphones, social media, and television shows from Manila or abroad. In many ways, this has created both opportunities and threats. Opportunities lie in easier communication, broader education, and the ability to connect with networks of indigenous rights advocates worldwide. Yet the threats are profound. The lure of urban life, the abandonment of rituals, and the gradual erosion of traditional knowledge. For the Subanen, whose survival was long tied to memory and ritual, the greatest danger now is not foreign conquest, but forgetting. If the younger generations no longer dance the Buklog, no longer listen to the balian, no longer respect the ancestral spirits, then the chain of identity may weaken. Elders fear this deeply, often reminding children that without tradition, they will lose not only faith, but selfhood. The global age offers much, but it also demands vigilance to preserve the unbroken voice of the Subanen. Another feature of the modern era is migration. Many Subanen families now live in cities like Zamboanga, Cagayan de Oro, or even Manila. Some migrate abroad as overseas workers. This scattering has weakened communal rituals, for it is harder to gather families when they are separated by distance. Yet diaspora has also created new forms of Subanen identity. In cities, small associations form, organizing cultural nights, storytelling sessions, or even urban versions of the Buklog. Though they cannot always build large platforms, they improvise, using smaller stages, symbolic dances, and recorded gongs. These gatherings keep the community connected, reminding them of rivers and forests left behind. In some ways, diaspora has also helped the Subanen gain visibility. By living among wider Filipino society, they are able to advocate for indigenous rights and share their heritage beyond their own villages. The Subanen identity has thus stretched, no longer tied only to rivers, but now also alive in concrete jungles and distant lands. Interestingly, technology, the very force that threatens oral tradition, has also become a tool for revival. Subanen youth now record balian chants on mobile phones, upload videos of Buklog dances to social media, and create online archives of myths and stories. Through these efforts, knowledge that was once limited to memory is now preserved in digital form. This is a profound transformation. What colonizers failed to erase through centuries of pressure, the risk of forgetting could have destroyed silently. But by adapting digital tools, the Subanen are ensuring continuity. This is not a betrayal of tradition, but an expansion of it. After all, storytelling has always evolved with context, from fireside to stage, from chant to song. Now it evolves again into video, audio, and online platforms. Through this digital revival, the Subanen faith and identity gain new protection. Their unbroken resistance now travels not only by river, but also across the invisible streams of the internet. History often celebrates revolutions, uprisings, and battles. But the Subanen story offers a different lesson: resistance without war. They did not overthrow colonizers in dramatic battles or carve out empires with swords. Instead, they resisted through survival, adaptation, and refusal. They withdrew deeper into forests when threatened, dispersed when pressured, and politely declined conversion when confronted. This kind of resistance is quieter, but perhaps more powerful, for it endured across centuries. It teaches that not all victories are loud. Some are whispered. The Subanen show that the greatest weapon a people can wield is sometimes not the spear but memory, not the fortress but ritual. Their refusal to bow to either cross or crescent ensured that even today, their faith continues to live. This challenges us to broaden our understanding of what it means to resist. Resistance is not always about fighting. It is about remaining. Another lesson from the Subanen is the inseparability of faith and identity. For them, Megayep was not just a religion. It was life woven into farming, healing, community, and celebration. To abandon, it would have been to abandon themselves. This unity gave them strength, for it meant that conversion could never be partial. A Subanen might attend Mass or recite Islamic prayers for diplomacy, but in their heart, they still turn to Magbabaya, still listen to the balian, still dance the Buklog. Their faith was inseparable from their being. This lesson speaks broadly. Identity is strongest when rooted deeply in culture, not just in symbols, but in daily practice. The Subanen remind us that survival requires not only belief, but continuity, carrying one's worldview as inseparably as one carries breath. Finally, the Subanen teach us the value of quiet strength. In a world that often glorifies noise, conquest, and spectacle, their story shows the endurance of silence, patience, and persistence. They were underestimated precisely because they did not rebel violently. Yet by refusing to abandon their ways, they outlasted empires. Spain is gone, the sultanates of old have faded, but the Subanen faith remains. This is a profound reminder that strength is not always about domination. Sometimes it is about endurance. In the dance of Buklog, in the chants of the balian, in the stories of elders, the Subanen whisper a lesson to all of us. True power lies not in ruling others, but in remaining true to oneself. As we look back across history, the Subanen story stands as a quiet victory. They were never fully conquered, never fully converted. They endured through centuries of colonial pressure, religious missions, economic encroachment, and modern globalization. Their resistance was not a single dramatic event, but a continuous thread of survival. Each generation found its own way to say no, some by retreating into forests, some by dancing the Buklog, some by whispering prayers to Magbabaya while attending foreign rituals. In the end, this continuity is victory. The Subanen remind us that history is not only written by conquerors, but also carried by those who refuse to be erased. Their faith, their rituals, and their identity endured when many thought it would vanish. This is their triumph. Today, the Subanen stand at a crossroads. Many have entered modern society, working in offices, attending universities, even serving in government. Yet, even as they navigate the world of cities and technology, they carry within them the old faith. Some return home each year to join the Buklog. Others teach their children the name of Magbabaya, and still others work to document and preserve oral traditions. The world has finally begun to recognize their heritage as valuable, not primitive. From UNESCO's recognition of Buklog to academic studies highlighting their spirituality, the Subanen identity is now seen as a cultural treasure. But more importantly, within their communities, it remains a living truth. The faith that endured is not simply past. It is present, woven into the lives of a people who continue to walk the rivers and hills of Mindanao. In the end, the Subanen built no stone palaces, left no towering monuments, and commanded no vast armies. But they built something stronger, an unbroken faith. Across centuries of pressure, they carried their creator, their rituals, their dances, and their stories. They show us that true strength lies not only in conquest, but in preservation, not only in power, but in continuity. Their lesson is simple but profound. Identity can survive empires if carried faithfully in memory and ritual. As the Buklog platform resounds with the stamping feet of a new generation, the Subanen continue to declare to the world, "We are still here, and our faith endures." This is the final gift of their story, a reminder that even in the shadow of empires, the smallest voice can last longer than the loudest throne. The Subanen are not the only people in the Philippines who face pressure from empire, mission, and modernity. Across the archipelago, many other indigenous groups, Ifugo in the Cordilleras, Mangian in Mindoro, Lumad communities in Mindanao, experienced similar histories. Like the Subanen, they were often labeled as unconverted or backward by outsiders, judged not for their wisdom, but for their refusal to adopt foreign faiths. Yet within these groups, survival strategies took different forms. The Ifugo built rice terraces, engineering marvels that became both food source and fortress. The Mangian retreated into forests, preserving their scripts and rituals in seclusion. The Lumad, like the Subanen, relied on dispersed settlements and oral traditions. What unites them all is the quiet insistence on continuity, an understanding that identity cannot be surrendered without losing the very essence of life. For the Subanen, this unity with other indigenous peoples is a reminder that their resistance was part of a broader story of survival. Yet their path remained distinct. Where others built monuments, they built rhythms. Where others defended fields with spears, they defended rivers with rituals. Their resistance was not loud, but it was just as enduring. Though distinct, indigenous groups were not isolated from one another. Traders, migrants, and travelers brought stories and goods across mountains and seas. Subanen communities sometimes encountered neighboring Lumad groups, exchanging songs, myths, or tools. These exchanges enriched their traditions while reinforcing a sense of belonging to a larger indigenous world. Yet the Subanen always held tightly to their own center: Magbabaya, Megayep, and Buklog. Encounters with others broadened their perspective but did not dilute their core. This balance is important. Openness without surrender. By learning from neighbors, the Subanen demonstrated flexibility. By holding to their creator and rituals, they demonstrated resilience. Outsiders often misunderstood this, thinking them indecisive or passive. But in truth, it was a strategy of cultural navigation, sailing the wide waters of diversity while keeping their own anchor firmly in place. Through this navigation, they became part of a tapestry of indigenous endurance across the islands, each group distinct yet bound by a common refusal to disappear. Today, when the Philippine nation tells its story, it often highlights heroes of revolution, national independence, and colonial encounters. Yet woven beneath this national narrative is the quieter story of indigenous peoples like the Subanen. Their place is not on battlefields, but in valleys, rivers, and forests. Their contribution is not in political revolutions, but in cultural endurance. To include the Subanen in the Philippine story is to recognize that identity is not only forged by conquest, but also preserved by resistance. Without them, the picture of a nation would be incomplete, for it would forget the voices that endured even when erased from textbooks. By standing alongside other indigenous groups, the Subanen remind the nation that true history is plural, layered, and diverse. Their story is one thread, but without it the tapestry would unravel. In honoring the Subanen, we honor the resilience of all who carried faith against the tide of empire. For the Subanen, rivers are more than water, they are mothers. They feed the land, carry fish, cleanse bodies, and provide the rhythm of life. Every village rose near a river. Every planting season depended on its flow, and every story returned to its source. The river was not only physical, but spiritual, a sacred being to be honored and respected. In Megayep, spirits guard these waters, ensuring balance between human and nature. To pollute a river, to disrespect it, was not only to harm the environment, but to break faith with Magbabaya and the unseen world. This ecological spirituality gave the Subanen resilience. While outsiders built stone churches, the Subanen built invisible shrines in the ripples of rivers. Their resistance was not only against foreign religion, but also against the destruction of nature. They knew that to remain Subanen, they must remain people of the river. And so, even today, their identity is tied to these flowing waters that whisper the prayers of ancestors. The forests of the Zamboanga Peninsula provided the Subanen with food, medicine, and shelter. But more than that, they provided sanctuary. Whenever threatened, the Subanen withdrew into forests where outsiders could not easily follow. These forests were alive with spirits, guardians of trees, mountains, and animals, making them sacred spaces of both survival and worship. The balian drew herbs from these forests, chanting as they prepared healing remedies. Hunters asked permission before taking game, offering thanks to spirits for their generosity. This reciprocal relationship between humans and environment was the foundation of resilience. To live rightly was to live in balance with the land. Thus, when colonizers sought to strip the forests, they were not only attacking resources, but violating the sacred. The Subanen's ecological ethic was their shield, ensuring that even in exile, they were never lost. For as long as the forest stood, their faith had a home. Today, environmental destruction poses perhaps the greatest threat to Subanen survival. Logging companies cut into sacred forests. Mining corporations dig into ancestral hills, and rivers are polluted by industrial waste. Yet resistance continues, now in new forms. Subanen leaders speak in courts and protests, invoking both ancestral spirits and environmental law. Youth groups plant trees not only as ecological action, but as ritual renewal. Elders remind communities that every ecological act is also spiritual, that to save rivers and forests is to save themselves. This blending of ecological activism with ancestral spirituality is a powerful form of resistance, linking the old with the new. In this way, the Subanen show that their unbroken faith is not only about rituals of the past, but about protecting the future. To be Subanen today is to stand for rivers and forests, to declare that nature itself is sacred, and to resist all forces that would destroy it. The Subanen face a future where continuity is not guaranteed. The lure of modern education, urban migration, and global culture threatens to draw young people away from ancestral traditions. Many Subanen youth grow up speaking Cebuano or Tagalog more fluently than their own tongue. Some attend churches that condemn the Buklog as pagan, while others work in cities far from balian chants. The greatest danger is not conquest, but indifference. The slow forgetting of rituals when they are not practiced, the quiet fading of chants when they are not sung. Elders worry that when they pass, the chain may break. Yet within this fear lies also determination. Communities are documenting rituals, training apprentices for the role of balian, and ensuring that festivals continue despite hardship. Continuity is not easy, but the Subanen know better than anyone that survival requires persistence. Their story has always been about enduring despite the odds, and so the challenge of continuity is one they are prepared to face. Alongside challenges, there are also signs of revival. Subanen youth are rediscovering pride in their heritage, wearing traditional garments in schools, posting videos of Buklog dances online, and interviewing elders to preserve oral histories. Universities and NGOs have partnered with communities to document myths, record chants, and support festivals. These efforts are more than preservation. They are renewal. By adapting to modern tools, the Subanen are ensuring that their faith is not a relic, but a living force. Every recording, every article, every performance shared beyond their valleys is a declaration. We are here, we are Subanen, and our faith still breathes. Renewal comes not from abandoning tradition, but from carrying it into new spaces. In this way, the Subanen are not only preserving the past, but also building the future, ensuring that their children will dance the Buklog not as a museum piece, but as a living prayer. Ultimately, the future of Subanen spirituality rests on the same principle that carried them through centuries: resilience. As long as they honor Magbabaya, respect the spirits of rivers and forests, and dance the Buklog, their identity will endure. Empires have fallen, faiths have competed, economies have shifted, but the Subanen have remained. Their story is not about conquest, but about survival, not about dominance, but about faithfulness. The future may bring new challenges, but it also brings new opportunities. With global recognition, digital tools, and growing awareness of indigenous rights, the Subanen are better positioned than ever to carry their faith forward. And so, their unbroken resistance becomes an unbroken future. They will continue to remind the world that strength lies not only in power, but in preservation, not only in conquest, but in continuity. As long as rivers flow and forests stand, the Subanen faith will endure, unbroken, unbowed, alive. In many societies, religion has often been dominated by male authority: priests, imams, bishops, monks. Yet in Subanen spirituality, women play a central and irreplaceable role. The balian, often women, serve as the bridge between the human and the spiritual. They are healers, counselors, memory keepers, and ritual leaders. Their knowledge of herbs, chants, and sacred stories makes them indispensable. A community without its women cannot perform its rituals, cannot heal its sick, cannot thank Magbabaya. This gendered balance is a quiet form of resistance against outside structures. Catholic missionaries often tried to replace the authority of women with male priests. Islamic leaders emphasized male-led prayers. But the Subanen continued to trust their women, seeing in them a sacred balance. This recognition is not tokenism, but genuine authority, proof that in Subanen faith, wisdom, not gender, determines leadership. In honoring women, the Subanen resisted patriarchal systems that came with colonial religion, preserving an older, more balanced way of life. While women often guided rituals, men carried their own sacred responsibilities. They were builders of Buklog platforms, hunters of the forest, protectors of the community in times of threat. The Timue, usually male, embodied leadership through wisdom and fairness. Unlike kings or sultans, he did not wield absolute power but guided by consensus. Men were expected to uphold justice, defend honor, and ensure the survival of their families. Yet their authority was always balanced with that of women. A Timue could not lead if the balian refused to support him spiritually. A father could not harvest without the blessings mediated by women in ritual. This balance prevented tyranny and ensured that leadership remained rooted in service. For the Subanen, strength did not lie in domination, but in harmony between male and female roles. Together, men and women formed the heartbeat of community survival. The Subanen worldview is built upon balance between men and women, humans and spirits, rivers and forests, ancestors and descendants. This balance ensured survival for centuries. Where colonial religions often divided roles sharply and hierarchically, the Subanen preserved complementarity. No ritual could succeed without both genders contributing. No community could flourish if one voice drowned out the other. This sacred principle reflects a deeper wisdom. Survival requires harmony. By refusing to abandon this balance, the Subanen resisted systems that sought to reshape them. In every Buklog, one sees men building platforms and women leading chants. In every community, one sees authority divided but united. This balance is their shield, their resilience, and their gift to the world. The reminder that harmony, not hierarchy, sustains life. That at the center of Subanen cosmology is Magbabaya, the supreme creator who governs all. Unlike distant gods who dwell beyond reach, Magbabaya is present in every river, every tree, every human breath. He is both transcendent and immanent, both above and within. Alongside him are countless spirits, guardians of rivers, forests, and mountains, ancestral souls who guide the living, and forces of nature that must be respected. The universe is thus not divided between sacred and secular, but wholly sacred. Every act, planting, hunting, fishing, healing, is infused with spiritual meaning. For the Subanen, this worldview ensured resilience. When confronted with foreign religions that claimed ultimate authority, they already had a cosmology that was complete. They saw no need for replacement. Their faith was sufficient, their universe whole. This sense of completeness was their armor, shielding them from conversion and erasure. In Subanen belief, life is a journey woven with balance. and death is not an end, but a transition. When someone dies, the balian guides the spirit through rituals, ensuring safe passage to the spirit world. Ancestors do not vanish, but remain present, watching over descendants, receiving offerings, and intervening in times of crisis. To honor ancestors is to remain connected to the chain of life stretching back centuries. This vision contrasts with Catholic promises of heaven and hell, or Islamic visions of paradise and judgment. The Subanen afterlife is not about reward or punishment, but about continuity. One's spirit continues in relationship with the living, just as rivers continue to flow into seas. This continuity reinforced their resistance. They saw no reason to abandon ancestral faith when their ancestors themselves remained real and active. To forget Megayep would be to forget the very souls who walked before them. The Subanen cosmology is not built on conquest, domination, or fear, but on harmony. The spirits are not enemies, but allies. Magbabaya is not a tyrant, but a guide. Ancestors are not distant, but near. This worldview explains why the Subanen never felt compelled to replace their faith with Catholicism or Islam. They did not need salvation, for they already lived in sacred balance. They did not fear eternal damnation, for their spirits were cared for. They did not seek conquest, for their world was already whole. In this worldview lies the quiet strength of their endurance. Empires came with doctrines of power, judgment, and fear, but the Subanen stood firm with harmony, continuity, and gratitude. Their cosmology was their fortress, invisible yet unbreakable. The Subanen story is not just local, it carries global resonance. Across the world, indigenous peoples face colonization, forced conversion, and cultural erasure. Native Americans in the Americas, Aboriginal peoples in Australia, First Nations in Canada, all endured similar pressures. Many lost languages, rituals, and faiths to the tide of empire. The Subanen, by contrast, preserved a significant part of their spiritual world. Their story becomes a lesson. Resistance need not be loud to be effective. By quietly refusing, by enduring through rituals and memory, they achieved what armies could not. This lesson inspires other indigenous communities today. That survival is possible, that continuity is a form of victory, and that faith, when tied to identity, can withstand centuries of pressure. That UNESCO's recognition of the Buklog as intangible cultural heritage of humanity places the Subanen within the global map of spiritual treasures. Their rituals are not only for themselves, but for all humanity, reminding us of the diversity of ways humans connect with the sacred. In a world often dominated by monotheistic religions, the Subanen show the richness of indigenous cosmologies. Their dance, their chants, their worldview contribute to a wider understanding of what it means to be human. By preserving their traditions, they're not only safeguarding their own identity, but enriching the spiritual heritage of the world. Their resistance thus transforms into contribution, their survival into gift. Looking forward, the Subanen face both opportunities and responsibilities. As the world grows more interconnected, their rituals may gain more visibility through media, scholarship, and tourism. This visibility can bring support and pride, but also risks of exploitation and commercialization. The challenge is to ensure that recognition does not strip the rituals of their sacred meaning. Yet the Subanen are not strangers to adaptation. They have always balanced openness with loyalty. By sharing their rituals carefully, on their own terms, they can both preserve and share. In doing so, they continue their role as quiet teachers to the world, showing that faith is not only belief, but identity, not only ritual, but survival. Their global significance lies not in conquest, but in continuity, not in dominance, but in endurance. When modern education spread through Mindanao, it arrived with both promise and peril. For the Subanen, schools offered literacy, new opportunities, and the ability to engage with the wider world. Yet schools were also tools of assimilation. Children were often taught in Cebuano or Tagalog, rarely in their own tongue. Textbooks spoke of national heroes but said little of Magbabaya or Buklog. Teachers sometimes discouraged indigenous rituals, labeling them as superstition. This created a silent struggle within Subanen families. How to embrace the benefits of schooling without losing ancestral knowledge. Some parents encouraged children to learn in school by day and listen to elders by night. Others worried that their children, drawn to modern life, would abandon the chants and stories that defined their people. In this tension lies a double-edged sword. Education as a path to empowerment, but also as a potential eraser of identity. The Subanen have learned to walk this line carefully, ensuring that learning new knowledge does not mean forgetting old wisdom. While schools focused on national curriculum, the true education of Subanen children often happened at home. Grandparents taught them the stories of Magbabaya, the roles of spirits, the rituals of planting and harvest. Mothers whispered protective chants to infants. Fathers showed children how to honor rivers before fishing, or how to thank the forest after hunting. This hidden education was not written in books, but lived in practice. Even as children learned to recite the national anthem, they also learned to recite ancestral chants. Even as they memorized multiplication tables, they memorized the steps of Buklog dances. In this dual education, we see once again the Subanen strategy of endurance, adaptation without surrender. Schools could teach them to be citizens of the Republic, but home taught them to remain children of Magbabaya. Today, Subanen leaders are finding ways to integrate indigenous knowledge into formal education. Some communities lobby for mother tongue instruction in Subanen language. Others create local modules that teach children about Buklog, balian rituals, and oral traditions. NGOs and scholars assist by documenting chants and producing storybooks in Subanen dialects. These efforts represent a new chapter of resistance, not retreating from education, but reshaping it to serve their identity. By placing their heritage within classrooms, the Subanen ensure that children do not see tradition as backward, but as part of their proud inheritance. Education thus becomes not a threat, but a tool of preservation, carrying Subanen identity into the future. In this transformation, the Subanen show once more their genius, turning every challenge into a chance for survival. Music has always been the lifeblood of Subanen rituals. The gongs, drums, and chants are not mere entertainment, but prayer and sound. When gongs clash during Buklog, they do more than set rhythm. They call ancestors to join the dance. When chants rise in the night, they carry petitions to Magbabaya. For outsiders, these sounds may seem exotic or strange, but for the Subanen, they are the very voice of faith. Colonizers try to silence these instruments, labeling them heathen noise. Yet the Subanen continued to play, often in secret. Each beat of the drum was an act of defiance, each chant a refusal to bow. In this sense, music itself became resistance, resistance that could not be chained or silenced. Long after the friars left and the missionaries passed, the sound of gongs still echoed in valleys. The Subanen knew that as long as their music survived, their faith lived. Dance, too, carried deep spiritual meaning. The steps of Buklog were not random, but symbolic. Stomping feet echoed the heartbeat of the earth. Swaying bodies mirrored the rhythm of rivers, and circular movements reflected harmony and community. In dancing, The Subanen were not performing for audiences, but offering prayer to Magbabaya. Outsiders who dismissed the dances as pagan spectacle misunderstood their essence. Each gesture, each sway, was communication with the unseen world. To stop dancing would have been to stop praying. Thus, the Subanen danced even when pressured to kneel before foreign altars. Dance became their altar, their sacred liturgy. In the movement of bodies, they carried the memory of ancestors, the presence of spirits, and the continuity of identity. This was worship that no empire could erase. Today, music and dance remain central to Subanen life. During Buklog, young people learn the old rhythms, beating gongs with pride. Elders teach chants, ensuring their melodies are carried forward. Cultural festivals now highlight these traditions, sometimes in cooperation with government or NGOs. While there's always the danger of commercialization, the Subanen carefully distinguish between performance for outsiders and ritual for themselves. In both, however, music and dance remain acts of identity. They remind the world and themselves that Subanen faith is not silent, but resounds in rhythm and movement. In this way, they continue to resist erasure, using sound and dance as living declarations of who they are. In the wider Philippine nation, the Subanen have often been misunderstood. Many lowland Filipinos saw them as backward or primitive, unaware of their rich spiritual heritage. Catholic missionaries sometimes portrayed them as stubborn, while government officials saw them as obstacles to development. Such views marginalized the Subanen, reducing their identity to stereotypes. Yet slowly, recognition has grown. Anthropologists, historians, and advocates have highlighted their wisdom, rituals, and resilience. The nation is beginning to see that the Subanen are not relics of the past, but living contributors to cultural diversity. Their resistance is no longer dismissed as indifference, but celebrated as strength. Still, misunderstanding lingers, and the Subanen continue to face prejudice. But as their story becomes more widely told, respect grows, ensuring that their place in the Philippine nation is not erased but honored. The Subanen contribute to national culture not only through Buklog, but through values of resilience, balance, and community. In a country often torn by political conflict and division, their quiet endurance offers lessons in harmony. Their ecological spirituality provides insights for a nation struggling with deforestation and climate change. Their respect for women's roles offers inspiration for gender equality. In this sense, the Subanen are not isolated but deeply relevant. Their resistance is not only for themselves, but for the nation, reminding all Filipinos that identity is strongest when rooted in culture. As the Philippines seeks to define itself in a globalized world, the Subanen remind it that true strength lies not only in modernity, but also in memory. The challenge now is to ensure that the Subanen are not left behind as the nation moves forward. Development must respect their land rights, education must include their heritage, and politics must hear their voices. Only then can the Philippine nation truly claim unity in diversity. For the Subanen, this shared future does not mean surrender, but partnership, carrying their rituals, their faith, and their worldview into national life. In this partnership, both the nation and the Subanen are enriched. The Subanen gain recognition and protection. The nation gains wisdom and heritage. Together, they can build a future that honors the past while embracing the present. In this vision, the Subanen are not forgotten tribes, but honored pillars of identity, their unbroken faith shining as part of the Philippine soul. For centuries, Mindanao was a landscape of conflict. The Spanish clashed with Moro sultanates. Later Americans fought insurgents. And in modern times, various armed groups challenged the Philippine state. Yet amid these violent struggles, the Subanen often remained neutral. They were neither warriors of the sultanates nor soldiers of empire. Instead, they lived in valleys and forests, quietly tending to their fields and performing their rituals. This neutrality was not cowardice, but wisdom. By avoiding entanglement in wars not their own, they preserved their people from destruction. Outsiders sometimes accused them of passivity, but in truth, it was a strategy of survival. In their neutrality, they carried their greatest weapon, invisibility. When armies marched, the Subanen dispersed. When battles raged, they withdrew to rivers and mountains. Their refusal to choose sides ensured their continuity when others were consumed by fire. In a land soaked with conflict, their silence was resistance, their neutrality strength in modern times. Mindanao has seen the rise of guerrilla movements, both ideological and religious. The New People's Army, NPA, roamed the mountains, while Moro separatist groups defended ancestral homelands. The Subanen, caught in the middle, often faced accusations from both sides, accused of harboring rebels, accused of siding with the military. Yet their true allegiance was always to Magbabaya and to their community. Some Subanen villages suffered displacement, forced to flee when battles erupted nearby. Others were pressured into paying taxes to armed groups. Yet even under duress, they maintained their rituals, carrying the Buklog into refugee camps, whispering chants beneath the sound of gunfire. Their faith remained their refuge, their compass in chaos. By clinging to ritual and identity, they resisted being swallowed by conflicts they did not start. They proved again that survival lies not in choosing conquerors, but in refusing to forget oneself. For the Subanen, peace is not merely the absence of war, but the restoration of balance between humans, spirits, and the natural world. True peace means rivers flowing clean, forests standing strong, families dancing the Buklog without fear. Their vision contrasts with political treaties or ceasefires, which focus on power sharing among elites. The Subanen know that real peace begins in the community, in rituals of reconciliation, in offerings to Magbabaya. Elders remind younger generations that to sow hatred is to break balance, while to forgive is to heal. Their peaceful worldview offers a lesson to a region scarred by conflict. That peace is not won by armies, but by communities choosing harmony. Through neutrality and resilience, the Subanen have endured where empires and rebels have failed. Their vision of peace, rooted in faith and balance, remains their quiet gift to Mindanao. Beyond ritual and chant, Subanen identity also shines through art. Beadwork is one of their most cherished crafts, with intricate patterns woven into necklaces, belts, and clothing. These beads are not merely decorative, but symbolic, carrying stories of rivers, mountains, and ancestors. Women especially pass down beadwork skills, teaching daughters to thread meaning into every design. Weaving, too, holds sacred value. Mats, bags, and garments are made not only for daily use, but for ritual offerings. Patterns echo cosmology. Circles representing balance, lines representing rivers, colors reflecting the earth and sky. To outsiders, these may look like simple designs, but to the Subanen they are living texts, unwritten books of identity. In every bead and woven thread lies a silent act of resistance. Proof that despite centuries of change, their hands still create beauty anchored in faith. The Subanen world is also filled with objects crafted for specific purposes. Drums carved from logs, gongs forged from metal, ritual bowls shaped for offerings. These are not just functional items, but sacred companions. A drum is not only an instrument, but a voice of the spirits. A gong does not merely produce sound, but calls ancestors to join the dance. Even farming tools carry spiritual weight. Before planting, they are blessed. Before harvesting, they are thanked. Each object thus participates in the sacred cycle of life. To hold a Subanen artifact is to touch both the material and the spiritual. This deep symbolism ensured that even when colonizers introduced foreign tools and clothing, the Subanen preserved their own, knowing that objects are more than matter. They are carriers of faith. Through these crafted things, they carried their identity across generations. In modern times, Subanen crafts face the danger of being commercialized, sold as souvenirs stripped of sacred meaning. Yet many communities work to protect their integrity. Elders teach that beadwork is not only for profit, but for prayer, that weaving is not only craft, but heritage. By passing these lessons to youth, they ensure that art remains sacred. Festivals showcase beadwork and dance not as tourist shows, but as affirmations of identity. NGOs assist by documenting designs, ensuring that patterns are not lost. In this way, Subanen art becomes more than decoration. It becomes living resistance. Each bead, each woven mat is a declaration. We are still here, still Subanen, still faithful. Art carries what swords cannot destroy and what books cannot erase. It is continuity in color and pattern, an unbroken thread of survival. In the 21st century, many Subanen youth migrate to cities for work or study. They become part of urban landscapes filled with neon lights, concrete towers, and fast-paced life. In these cities, being Subanen can feel distant, even invisible. Employers rarely know their heritage. Classmates often assume they are simply lowland Filipinos. Yet within their hearts, the memory of rivers and forests remains. Some struggle with identity, feeling caught between two worlds. Others embrace the duality, carrying Subanen songs into karaoke bars, weaving bead patterns onto modern bags, or sharing Buklog videos on social media. Migration threatens continuity, but also creates new forms of identity. Subanen who are both rooted and global, both traditional and modern. This adaptation is not surrender, but evolution, proof that identity can survive even far from home. The modern Philippine state offers spaces for indigenous representation, yet Subanen voices are still often drowned by louder groups. Some Subanen leaders enter politics, advocating for ancestral domain, land rights, and cultural preservation. Others join NGOs, universities, or media, using modern platforms to amplify their cause. Representation remains uneven, but progress is visible. Where once Subanen were silent in national debates, now their voices begin to be heard. This political awakening is part of their resistance. Survival not only through ritual, but through policy. They demand recognition not only as subjects of heritage, but as citizens with rights. In this struggle, they carry the same resilience their ancestors showed: polite, persistent, unbroken. Politics becomes another field of continuity, another space where Subanen identity endures. Perhaps the greatest transformation in the 21st century is the rise of Subanen pride. Young people wear traditional clothing at school events, dance Buklog on stage, and tell their classmates, "I am Subanen." Social media, once a threat to oral tradition, now becomes a stage for cultural revival. Videos of dances circulate, stories are uploaded, chants are recorded. Pride replaces shame, visibility replaces invisibility. For future generations, this pride is crucial. It ensures that Subanen children grow up knowing their heritage not as a relic, but as living truth. As they step into the future, into universities, offices, or even global networks. They carry with them the rhythm of gongs, the wisdom of Balian, and the faith of Magbabaya. In this pride lies hope that the unbroken faith of centuries will not only endure, but flourish. You just witnessed the extraordinary journey of the Subanen, a people who refused to forget who they were. Today, we learned about their rivers and valleys, their creator Magbabaya, the chants of the balian, and the thunder of the Buklog. We saw how they stood firm between the cross and the crescent, how they resisted not by fighting, but by holding on. The moral of this story is clear. True strength lies not in conquest, but in preservation. Empires rise and fall, but faith carried in the heart endures. The Subanen remind us that identity is not lost when we refuse to let go of memory, tradition, and belief. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe to History Teller YT for more stories of hidden histories and enduring legacies. Share this with those who believe that history is only written by conquerors, because here we prove that sometimes history belongs to those who survive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep remembering, and keep telling history.